Shalom. Thanks for joining me. We're going to pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 22. Remember, these are the last hours of the life of Moses as he is standing on the eastern bank of the Jordan River on the plains of Moab, telling all the Israelites all the accounts and the incidents and the acts of God with his people, and also repeating all the law of God. So let's join Moses as he is speaking here, chapter 22, verse 1. You are not to watch your brother's ox or sheep straying and behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must bring it back to your brother. If your brother is not close by, or you don't know who the owner is, you're to bring it home to your house, and it will remain with you until your brother asks for it, and then you are to give it back to him. You are to do the same with his donkey, his coat, or anything else of your brother's that he loses. If you find something he lost, you must not ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or ox collapsed on the road, you may not behave as if you hadn't seen it. You must help him get it up on his feet again. Now, this is very interesting because the use of the word brother, by the way, is talking about your fellow Israelite. It's not necessarily talking about your blood brother, your kin. It's talking about anyone who's a fellow Israelite. And notice it's talking about how compassionate you need to be to animals, even though they're not your property. If you see them straying, and you know it's somebody's donkey or horse or cow or whatever, you take it in, take care of it, and you try to get it back to whoever it may be. If you don't know who the owner is, you keep it and you take care of it until that owner shows up and takes possession of it. Now, it's also interesting that if you see an ox or a donkey collapsed on the road, you don't ignore it. You help it get back up. Now, that's interesting because it might be inconvenient for you to take the time out of your day to help a stray animal or to help a strange animal or to help a stranger, and you don't want to do it because it may be too much trouble for you, but you do it anyway. So this tells us how we're supposed to have a compassion not only for animals, but a care and a compassion for our fellow citizen. That's interesting. All right, now here's the interesting verse 5. A woman is not to wear men's clothing, and a man is not to put on women's clothing, for whoever does these things is detestable to Adonai. This is about cross-dressing. And the scripture says that is detestable to Adonai. In case you're wondering, anything that is detestable to Adonai would be a sin. Even though it doesn't explicitly say, ooh, this is a sin, because it is detestable. It is a sin. If Adonai liked it, he would endorse it. Adonai does not endorse cross-dressing. Now, this has implications into our modern culture because there are folks who are wanting to transition their gender. And the scripture is saying this is detestable to God. All right, now look at verse 6. If, as you are walking along, you happen to see a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with chicks or eggs, and the mother bird is sitting on the chicks or the eggs, you're not to take the mother with the chicks. You must let the mother go, but you may take the chicks for yourself, so that things will go well with you and you will prolong your life. Now, it's about compassion to animals, but it's also about looking at this and realizing, okay, these are wild birds, and the mother has some chicks. The chicks would be something you would want for your flock, and you want to take the chicks with you. You bring them home, you take care of them, you add them to your flock. That's what he's talking about, but you let the mother go so that the mother can continue, to make more eggs and hatch more chicks one day. So you don't stop that. But it's also interesting that it uses this phrase, so that things will go well with you and you will prolong your life. That's interesting because that's a phrase that is commonly used to describe the blessings of obeying God's law, that it will prolong your life and that things will go well with you. Here it's talking about having an attitude toward animals, even wild animals, of compassion, of consideration, and that means that it will go well with you. How about that? Verse 8, when you build a new house, you must build a low wall around your roof, otherwise someone may fall from it and you will be responsible for his death. That's an interesting statement because every house, frequently in those days, people spent a lot of time up on their roof. They didn't have modern ventilation like we have in most houses today. So they would go upstairs. They would build outer stairs on the edge of the house, and they would go up there and they'd spend a lot of time on the roof. They would build a little shelter up there as well, so you could have some shade, maybe some shelter from rain, but you would get better ventilation and it felt better up there. And so as a result, you built a little low wall around the edge of that house, around the edge of the roof, so that someone wouldn't fall off there, like a toddler, an older person, or just anyone randomly might accidentally fall off. But if they were injured or if they were killed, that was on you. So this again is another aspect of how the law is teaching us to always be looking out for the welfare of our brother or our sister. All right, take a look at verse 9. Now, this is interesting because, earlier we talked about cross-dressing, right? About men wearing women's clothing, women wearing men's clothing. And so this is another example of law describing things that don't go together. You're not to sow two kinds of seed between the rows of your vines. If you do, both the two harvested crops and the yield from the vines must be forfeited. You're not to plow with an ox and a donkey together. You're not to wear clothing woven with two kinds of thread, wool and linen together. So it's interesting how they describe various things here. Donkey and ox plowing together. Not to wear clothing that has a blend of two different kinds of fabrics. Now today in our modern culture, we think nothing of like a poly wool blend or a poly cotton blend. We don't think of, anything like that. It doesn't bother us at all. But in those days and time, they didn't have polyester, by the way. In those days and time, every fabric was a natural fiber. And one of the ways you regarded that is you made a clothing from that fiber and that fiber only. That's just the way they did it. And so here it is encased in the law, by the way. And notice also about not two different kinds of seeds. In other words, when you sowed a field, it was all one kind of seed. You didn't grow different crops together side by side, okay? At least, like if you were to have a personal home garden, you can arrange it any way you want it to, basically, essentially. But what they're saying here is for your field where you would grow food and feed as well. You didn't grow two different types of crops together at the same time, one at a time. Things that don't go together. That's what he's saying, basically. All right, and then out of the ordinary, just out of the blue here, verse 12, interesting little sentence. You're to make for yourself twisted cords on the four corners of the garment you wrap around yourself. In Numbers chapter 15, there is a description of what is called the tallit, T-A-L-L-I-T, the tallit. It's a prayer shawl. And on the four corners of the prayer shawl are to be a long twisted cord, or long twisted cords together, and twisted throughout the middle of that cord is one long blue cord, and the blue cord serves to remind you to obey the law of God. And so here is this prayer shawl, and you wrap it over you, and you wrap it completely around you, and then you open it up, and you say certain prayers when you pick it up, certain prayers when you wrap it around you, certain prayers as you lay it over your shoulders. And this is all he's talking about is the four corners of this garment. You should have those twisted cords on them. All right, verse 13, if a man marries a woman and has sexual relations with her, then having come to dislike her, brings false charges against her and defames her character by saying, I married this woman, but when I had intercourse with her, I did not find evidence that she was a virgin. Then the girl's father and mother are to take the evidence of the girl's virginity to the leaders of the town at the gate. The girl's father will say to the leaders, I let my daughter marry this man, but he hates her. So he has brought false charges that he didn't find evidence of her virginity yet. Here is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they will lay the cloth before the town leaders. The leaders of that town are to take the man, punish him, and fine him 2.5 pounds of silver shekels. That's a lot of money, by the way, which they will give to the girl's father, because he has publicly defamed a virgin of Israel. She will remain his wife, and he is forbidden from divorcing her as long as he lives. I don't know about you, but it doesn't sound like the greatest marriage. But there it is. That's simply the law of Moses. Verse 20, this continues the same situation. But if the charge is substantiated, that evidence for the girl's virginity could not be found, then they are to lead the girl to the door of her father's house, and the men of her town will stone her to death, because she has committed in Israel the disgraceful act of being a prostitute while still in her father's house. In this way you will put an end to such wickedness among you. That's a harsh penalty. Yes. Sex outside of marriage was sacred. You don't do that. Sex within marriage meant that you were faithful to your spouse, and you also didn't lie about your spouse. So this is important to recognize that. Now, continuing along with the same kind of subject, verse 22, if a man is found sleeping with a woman who has a husband, both of them must die, the man who went to bed with the woman and the woman too. In this way you will expel such wickedness from Israel. In other words, if you're committing adultery and y'all get caught, both of you are supposed to be killed. It's a death penalty for committing adultery. It's interesting because in the ministry of Jesus, in John chapter 8, the Pharisees who wanted to try to discredit Jesus brought a woman to him who they said had been caught in the act of adultery, and they threw her down in front of him, in front of the whole crowd, and they said, well, now, just, what Moses' law said is we're supposed to kill her. What do you say? Now, it's interesting, by the way, that they didn't bring the man. They only brought the woman. I always find that interesting. But here's Jesus. He looks at this woman, and he says something very interesting. He got down on the ground and was writing on the ground in front of all these people, and slowly he said this. He said, sure, yeah, the Moses' law said let's stone her. So I'll tell you what. Let the one among you who is without sin be the first one to cast a stone. Then he gets down and starts doodling in the ground. The men walked away slowly, one by one, being ashamed of themselves. That's interesting. And then Jesus stands up and looks at her and said, where are your accusers? Well, she said, they're not here anymore. He said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That's interesting. Moses' law said, if you find out she's done this, you kill her. Jesus said, okay, if that's what you want to do, if that's how harsh you want to be, then the one of you who is without sin, you be the one to cast the first stone. At least the men recognized they were with sin and walked away. And Jesus did not condemn her. He gave her a chance to redeem her life. Such is the grace of God. This is why the Gospel of John says when Jesus appeared, he appeared full of truth and grace. God gives grace through Jesus. All right, now we come down to verse 23. If a girl who is a virgin is engaged to a man and another man comes upon her in the town and has sexual relations with her, you are to bring them both out to the gate of the city and stone them to death. The girl, because she didn't cry out for help there in the city, and the man, because he has humiliated his neighbor's wife. In this way, you will put an end to such wickedness among you. So the death penalty again for this, and this is a young woman who is engaged. Now, in that culture, you went through a ceremony called a betrothal, and that meant you were formally married, but you were not allowed to consummate the marriage until you actually had the marriage ceremony, which would be usually about a year later. So here's this woman who is engaged, and this man has sex with her, and the assumption is she didn't cry out for help, so she's as guilty as he is. So this is adultery, and they both have the death penalty again for that. But verse 25, but if the man comes upon the engaged girl out in the countryside, and the man grabs her and has sexual relations with her, then only the man who had intercourse with her is to die. You will do nothing to the girl, because she has done nothing deserving of death. The situation is like the case of the man who attacks his neighbor and kills him, for he found her in the countryside, and the engaged girl cried out, but there was no one to save her. The assumption is that she cried out for help, and no one was there to rescue her. So she was not able to fend him off, and so she ended up having to suffer the humiliation of this non-sexual consent, the non-sexual act, non-consensual sexual act. And then verse 28. If a man comes upon a girl who is a virgin, but who is not engaged, and he grabs her and has sexual relations with her, and they are caught in the act, then the man who had intercourse with her must give to the girl's father 1¼ pounds of silver shekels, and she will become his wife. Because he humiliated her, he may not divorce her as long as he lives. So again, this is a situation where if you are having premarital sex and you're not engaged, and you are caught, then you are to get married. Now that custom and culture permeated a great deal of Western culture, even to this day. So that's a thing to think about. These were the laws that Moses is reciting east of Jordan. Thanks for joining me.